Moving a toilet just cost one Canadian homeowner $130,000. Not because they did anything illegal, not because they hired the wrong contractor, but because of one silent technical threshold buried inside the Excise Tax Act that most real estate lawyers don't even think about until it's too late. That threshold has a name. The CRA calls it a substantial renovation, and if your property crosses it, you stop being a homeowner in the eyes of the tax system, you become a builder, and builders pay HST on the full fair market value of the finished property. Today, we are breaking down exactly how the 90% rule works, why so many renovation projects in Canada are crossing this line without the owner ever realizing it, and what specific decisions you can make right now to keep your equity exactly where it belongs. In your pocket, not the federal government's. Before we get into the mechanics, I want you to picture something. You bought a house 5 years ago, older home, great bones, terrible layout. Over 18 months you renovate it properly. New kitchen, new bathrooms. You move a load-bearing wall, redo all the plumbing, gut the basement, add a bedroom, replace the HVAC system, rip out every window. You are proud of this. You did it right. You got permits. You hired licensed trades. And then, 4 months after you move back in, a letter arrives from the CRA. They have determined that your renovation constitutes a substantial renovation under Section 191 of the Excise Tax Act. They have assessed you for HST based on the current appraised value of your home. That number is north of $130,000, due within 90 days. That is not a hypothetical. That pattern has played out in Canadian tax court more than once, and the homeowners who lost those cases all had one thing in common. They never understood what the word substantial actually means under Canadian tax law. So let's fix that right now. Most people hear the word substantial and they think it means big, expensive, significant. And that intuition is wrong in a very expensive way. The CRA does not define substantial by how much money you spent. They do not look at your contractor invoices and say, okay, $200,000 in work, that qualifies. The definition is structural, it is spatial, and it hinges on a specific question. What percentage of the building's interior has been gutted to the studs? That phrase, gutted to the studs, is the heartbeat of this entire rule. It means the renovation removed everything down to the bare structural framing. No drywall, no insulation, no finishes, just the skeleton of the building. And the CRA's position is that if 90% or more of the habitable interior of your home has been gutted to that level, the property is no longer considered a used residential property. It is treated as a newly constructed home, and newly constructed homes trigger the self-supply rule under Section 191. Which means you owe HST on the fair market value as if you had just built that house from scratch. Now here's where this gets complicated, and where the majority of Canadian homeowners make their critical mistake. People hear 90% and they think, okay, I'll stay under that. I'll make sure less than 90% of the house is touched. But the CRA is not measuring the percentage of your renovation budget. They are measuring the percentage of the building's habitable floor space that was stripped to the studs. Those are two completely different calculations. A homeowner can spend $400,000 renovating a property and never trigger the rule. A different homeowner can spend $150,000 and blow right through it. It depends entirely on which rooms were gutted, how completely they were gutted, and whether the structural framing behind the walls was exposed as part of the work. This is why the toilet example at the top of this video is so important. Moving a toilet is not an expensive renovation, but moving a toilet requires opening the floor. Opening the floor can mean exposing the subfloor structure. And if that work is happening in a bathroom that is part of a larger gut renovation, it can push a project across the 90% threshold in a way no one anticipated. Let's walk through what the CRA actually counts when they are making this assessment. The calculation focuses on the habitable areas of the home. That includes bedrooms, living rooms, dining rooms, kitchens, bathrooms, finished basements, home offices, any space that is designed for living. What is generally excluded from this measurement is the mechanical space, utility rooms, crawl spaces, unfinished attic areas that are not designed for occupation. So if you have a 1,500 square foot bungalow with a fully finished basement, you are looking at roughly 3,000 square feet of habitable space total. 90% of that is 2,700 square feet. That is the threshold. If your renovation stripped 2,700 square feet of that property down to the framing, the CRA's position is that you have substantially renovated the property. It does not matter if your renovation budget was low. It does not matter if you kept the original foundation. It does not matter if you lived in the house during part of the work. What matters is the scope of the strip out. Now I want to pause here and address something because I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. You are thinking, I renovated a property, I never triggered this. How do I know where I actually stand? Here's the honest answer. Many renovations that should have triggered the self-supply rule never got flagged. Not because the CRA missed them, but because the CRA is a bureaucracy operating on limited audit resources. The risk right now is that the CRA is becoming significantly better at identifying these situations, and they can assess back in time. If you completed a substantial renovation within the last several years, the risk window is still open. Keep that in mind as we move through the rest of this. Let me explain the self-supply rule in plain language because this is the part of the law that genuinely shocks people when they hear it for the first time. Under Section 191 of the Excise Tax Act, note, when a person who is not a registered builder substantially renovates a property and then occupies it or rents it out, the CRA deems that a taxable supply has occurred. The person who did the renovation is treated as if they were a professional builder who just sold a newly constructed home to themselves, and that deemed sale is subject to HST. The HST is calculated on the fair market value of the property at the time of first occupation after the renovation is complete, not on the cost of the renovation, on the fair market value of the entire property. In a major Canadian city where a renovated detached home might appraise at $1.2 million, HST on that value is significant. In Ontario, the combined federal and provincial HST rate applied to new residential construction generates a tax liability that can easily exceed $100,000 on a property at that price point, and the homeowner is on the hook for all of it, not because they sold the home. Not because they made a profit, simply because they did too thorough a job renovating it. There is one nuance here that provides some relief, and it is important you know about it. The GST/HST new housing rebate does apply in some substantial renovation scenarios, which can reduce the tax burden on homes with a fair market value below a certain threshold. However, and this is critical, the rebate phases out for higher value properties and does not eliminate the liability for most homes in major markets like Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, or Ottawa, and the rebate is a partial offset, not a rescue. You still need a tax professional to calculate your specific exposure. Now, let's talk about the line between a repair and an improvement, because this distinction sits at the core of how the 90% threshold is calculated in practice. The CRA has historically drawn a clear line between maintenance and capital improvement. Replacing a broken window is a repair. Replacing all the windows in the house with new frames, new glazing, and new exterior trim is a capital improvement. Fixing a leaking pipe is a repair. Rerouting the entire plumbing system to accommodate a new bathroom layout is a capital improvement. Patching drywall is a repair. Removing all the drywall on a floor to run new electrical and then replacing it is a gut renovation of that floor. Where homeowners consistently get into trouble is in the gray zone. The projects that start as targeted improvements and expand in scope. A kitchen renovation that requires opening the walls to update the electrical service. A bathroom reno that turns into a mold remediation project that exposes 3 adjacent walls. A basement finish that requires removing and replacing all existing interior partitions to meet current fire code. Each one of these expansions can contribute to the 90% calculation in ways that were never part of the original plan. Here is a case pattern that comes up repeatedly in discussions between real estate tax professionals. A homeowner in Ontario purchases an older semi-detached property with the intention of creating a legal second suite in the basement. The basement work alone is significant. Full gut, there's new flooring, new electrical panel, new plumbing rough-in. Then the homeowner decides to renovate the main floor kitchen while the trades are on site because it's economical to do it at the same time. Then the upper floor bathrooms are done because the plumber is already there. Then the bedroom closets are reconfigured. By the time the project is finished, nearly every habitable room in the property has been touched at the stud level. The homeowner spent money intelligently and efficiently, but the CRA's lens does not see efficiency. It sees a property that has been substantially renovated, and the self-supply clock started ticking the moment the owner moved back in. This brings us to the single most important risk mitigation strategy you need to understand: staging. Not home staging, renovation staging. The deliberate, documented, and time-separated execution of renovation. Work in phases with clearly delineated scopes. The CRA's substantial renovation threshold is assessed based on the scope of a single renovation project. If you can legitimately demonstrate that you completed separate, distinct renovation projects at different times, with different contractors, different permits, and different scopes of work, the analysis becomes significantly more complex for the CRA to apply. A renovation that guts 60% of the habitable space in year 1 is a large renovation. A renovation that addresses a different 40% of the habitable space 3 years later is another large renovation. Whether the combination of those two projects constitutes a substantial renovation is a legal and factual question that a qualified tax lawyer would need to examine. But it is a far more defensible position than a single 18-month project that touched 95% of the building in one continuous scope. I want to be precise here because this is an area where bad advice circulates constantly online. Staging your renovation to avoid the threshold only works if the staging is genuine. The phases need to be separated by real time. They need to have genuinely distinct scopes. The permits need to reflect separate projects. The contractor agreements need to be independent. The CRA has seen arrangements where homeowners tried to artificially divide a single project into multiple phases on paper, while the actual construction ran continuously. That does not work. The CRA looks at the substance of the arrangement, not just the documentation. If auditors determine that the phases were part of a single plan, they will assess the entire scope as one project. What we are talking about here is legitimate, thoughtful planning, making real decisions about which work to do now and which work to do later, with genuine breaks in between. That kind of planning, done with a tax professional before you break ground, is how you protect yourself. There are several specific decisions that homeowners are making every day that are quietly contributing to their risk exposure under this rule, and most of them do not realize it. Let me walk you through 5 of them. Decision 1. Choosing to remove all existing drywall rather than patch and repair. When the trades quote you on a renovation, there is often a cost-benefit calculation around whether to remove existing drywall or work around it. Removing existing drywall is cheaper and faster in some situations, and it allows for easier electrical and plumbing upgrades. But every room where you remove all the drywall is a room that counts toward the 90% calculation. If you are doing extensive work, consult with a tax professional before you make the call on drywall removal scope. Sometimes it is worth paying a premium to preserve walls in rooms that are not part of your primary renovation focus, specifically to keep the floor space calculation under the threshold. Decision 2. Combining a basement suite addition with a main floor renovation. This is the scenario I described earlier. Adding a legal secondary suite is a valuable investment and a legitimate property improvement, but the moment you start combining it with major main floor or upper floor work, you are stacking habitable square footage into the CRA's calculation. Keep secondary suite projects isolated in scope. Do not let them become the anchor for a whole home renovation plan. Decision 3. Pulling a single building permit for a multi-phase project. Some municipalities allow a single permit to cover a broad scope of work. From a construction management perspective, one permit can simplify the process, but from a tax perspective, a single permit that covers work throughout the entire house is documentation that one project touched the entire house. Consider whether it makes sense to pull separate permits for genuinely separate phases of work. Decision 4. Documenting renovation decisions in ways that imply a comprehensive whole home plan. Architect drawings, project timelines, contractor bids, sound and design presentations that describe a property-wide renovation are all potentially discoverable in a CRA audit. If your documents describe a project as a complete whole home renovation or a full gut and rebuild, those words matter. Documentation should accurately reflect what was actually done, phase by phase. Decision 5. Completing a substantial renovation and then renting the property rather than selling it. The self-supply rule is triggered not just by occupation, but by first rental use after a substantial renovation. Homeowners who gut a property and then decide to rent it out rather than move in are still triggering the rule. The HST liability does not disappear because you chose not to live there yourself, and in some cases, the rental decision can actually complicate the rebate calculation further. Now, I want to address the people watching this who have already completed a renovation that might have crossed this threshold. If you are in that position, the time to act is before the CRA contacts you, not after. There is a concept in Canadian tax law called voluntary disclosure that allows taxpayers to come forward with unreported obligations before the CRA initiates an audit. Doing so can reduce or eliminate penalties, though interest on the outstanding amount generally still applies. The decision about whether to pursue voluntary disclosure and how to structure it requires a qualified tax lawyer with specific experience in HST, residential real estate matters. This is not a general accountant situation. The intersection of Section 191, the GST/HST new housing rebate provisions, and the self-supply deemed sale rules is a narrow specialty. Make sure the professional you hire has actually litigated or resolved cases in this specific area. Let me give you the 3 actions that matter most right now, because this video is about more than understanding the problem. It's about knowing what to do with that understanding. First, if you are planning any renovation that will touch more than 3 or 4 rooms in your home, get a pre-renovation HST consultation with a qualified tax professional before you pull a single permit. Tell them your full scope of intended work. Ask them specifically whether your plan risks triggering Section 191. That conversation, done before you start, is the cheapest insurance you can buy. Second, if you are in the middle of a major renovation right now, stop and document where you stand, or create a room-by-room inventory of what has been stripped to the studs versus what has been worked on without full drywall removal. Calculate what percentage of your habitable floor space that represents. If you are approaching or above 70%, call a tax lawyer today. There may still be scope decisions you can make in the remaining work that affect your total exposure. Third, if you completed a substantial renovation in the last 4 years and you are uncertain whether the 90% threshold was crossed, speak to a tax professional confidentially. The CRA's ability to flag these properties is improving. Waiting for a letter is not a strategy. The 90% rule is one of the most financially dangerous provisions in the Canadian tax code for homeowners, not because it is aggressively enforced in every case, but because it is invisible until it is not. Homeowners are making renovation decisions every day without any awareness that a tax obligation of this magnitude is even possible. By the time they find out the renovation is done, the permit is closed, and the fair market value has been set. There is nowhere to go at that point except into an assessment defense, which is expensive, stressful, and often unsuccessful. What makes this particularly sharp right now is the environment Canadian real estate is in. Property values in major markets remain elevated despite recent corrections. A substantial renovation that closes in an environment where your property is still appraised high generates a significant HST base. and the CRA's audit capacity in the real estate sector has been expanding, not contracting. The data sharing between municipal permit systems and federal revenue agencies is more automated than it has ever been. This is not the environment to take risks you do not understand. Now, if you think the self-supply trap from a renovation is alarming, you need to see what the CRA is doing with properties that were converted from personal use to rental, and then back again during a single ownership period. The capital gains reassessment mechanism in those cases operates under a completely different set of deemed disposition rules, and the tax hit can arrive years after decisions were made that felt entirely routine at the time. That is the subject of the next video in this series, and the numbers involved make today's renovation discussion look straightforward by comparison. The link is on your screen right now. Watch it before you make any decision about changing how you use your Canadian property.